It's funny, as soon as I start recording, someone asks to join. All right, so hello everybody. Welcome to the UU Virtual Roundtable. My name is Sarah Reyes and I'll be today's moderator. So a couple of things before we begin. So number one is we are recording these sessions and I will be uploading them to the UUCLC YouTube page. If you have any issues accessing this, you should be able to check our Facebook page, as I also post them on there. So if you ever want to look back on some of these previous sessions and watch them, that would be the place to go. Number two is, so today we're going to be talking about, a kind of post-election analysis from these past few weeks. And it's going to be more of a discussion style of session, but the same rules still applies. We're going to have our two speakers kind of discuss the whole topic for about half an hour to 40 minutes. And after that, we will have a Q&A session. So during then, please hold off asking any questions just so that we can kind of stay on track and make it to the hour mark. And with that, that's about it for now. So we got Kathy and, oh wow. Eileen, yeah. I'm looking for the name and I'm like, where is it? You can take over now. Sorry about that.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all for having us. Eileen and I are really pleased to be here and enjoy talking about topics such as this. Just a few minutes ago, I was saying that the topic is a little odd to talk about post-election when we really seem to be, we had the endless campaign and now we have the endless election. But Eileen and I are each going to talk for a few minutes about the issues that we think are important. And Eileen came up with some questions that we hope you will answer before the hour is over. And we decided that of the three questions, the overriding one is, what can we do to strengthen our democracy and our community? That seems to be, if anything, is post-election, that seems to be an overriding concern. So I'm going to start with some issues that are related to this election that we've just come through, but some of these topics that I'm going to talk about were already on the drawing board of organizations like the League of Women Voters. But before I get into those specifics, I thought I'd start with a brief story that I found in the book Accidental President, published last year, and which I finished reading just about a year ago. And if you're not familiar with the book, the accidental presidents are the people who found themselves in the presidency without having anticipated that they would be there. And the story I'm going to tell is of John F. Kennedy. And this story shows up toward the end of the book in a chapter called Close Calls. And it recounts the situation of a disgruntled former postal worker from New Hampshire. He may have been just generally disgruntled, but his complaint related to John F. Kennedy was that Kennedy's father had purchased the presidency for him, and or that he was concerned about the president's Catholicism. But this was all before Kennedy actually became president. So this postal worker had been stalking him, and the event that is featured in the book is occurred between Election Day in 1960 and December 13th, which was the day the college was to meet. So in what we would have considered the norm prior to this month, Kennedy was the president-elect, but he was not officially president-elect in the sense that the Electoral College met. And this postal worker followed Kennedy to West Palm Beach, Florida, and had armed himself with dynamite and containers of gasoline. And it was his intent, pretty clearly, to do a suicide bombing in which both he and John F. Kennedy would be killed. He came pretty close over a period of a couple of days. He decided not to attack the president as he was leaving for church because his family members were there and he didn't want to do that. He entered the church and behaved kind of strangely, so the Secret Service did escort him outside. But in any case, you know, he did not succeed with this assassination attempt. As I thought about telling you this story, I realized that today is November 22nd, which many of us recognize as the day that President Kennedy was assassinated 57 years ago. The part of the point of putting the story in the book was to make clear that if the then president-elect, but not official president-elect, had been assassinated on that date in December 1960, that's an issue that is not addressed in the Constitution. So what would we have done? Would the electors have voted for Lyndon Johnson to be president? As you may know, the popular vote was very close that year. I looked it up, and the difference between Nixon and Kennedy's popular vote was less than 0.2 of a percentage point. It was a total of 118,000 votes. So part of the message of the book Accidental Presidents is that maybe our founding fathers were geniuses in setting things up, and maybe, or in addition, maybe we've been very lucky in terms of close calls, near misses, things of that sort. So to comment on a couple of election-related issues, I think we again have evidence of the Electoral College being something of a challenge for us. The League of Women Voters is in favor of popular election of the president, and in particular, getting rid of the Electoral College. Getting rid of the Electoral College, of course, is complicated because we have a process that's pretty difficult to get through if you want to amend the Constitution. In place of that, some of the states have come up with a proposal for a national compact, and I'd heard of this but wasn't really familiar with it until I did some research recently. There are 15 or 16 states that have agreed that they will send their electors to vote in the Electoral College based on the popular vote in the country. Once there are enough states in this compact to generate 270 electoral votes. The 15 or 16 states include New Mexico. Colorado is the most recent to join. Washington, Oregon, and California are members, along with some of the very small states. Rhode Island, Delaware are members. Together, they total 196 electoral votes. So with a few more states, this conceivably could happen and would be a way of keeping the Electoral College and still having a national popular vote. So I found that pretty interesting. Another election issue, and one that the League of Women Voters is preparing for in the state legislative session involves primary elections. We have a closed primary system in New Mexico, or we have had. This past summer, there was a special session of the legislature, and you may be aware that one of the important things that happened was the passage of Senate Bill 4. And part of what Senate Bill 4 did was to address some issues related to the pandemic. So they were targeted at the general election that we've just been through. One piece of that law is intended to be permanent, and that creates a more open primary system. It specifies that if you are an independent or someone who's declined to state your party preference, or are a member of a very minor party in New Mexico, that you can, at the time of the election, pick a party and vote in the primary election. Members of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and I think the Libertarian Party, would not have that opportunity. We would vote in whichever primary we were eligible, we were associated with as a party member. So what the Senate Bill 4 did was to open up the primary. There's some notion that will be up for further discussion in the legislative session. And the State League has just recently had a discussion, yesterday, as a matter of fact, about changing that if we have an opportunity, so that people don't have to declare a party. They would, an independent or a decline to vote, decline to state a party person would simply go to the polling place and say, I want to vote in the Republican primary, or I want to vote in the Democratic Party, but they wouldn't have to go through a process of changing their voter registration in any way. That's a process that one argument for it is that we have increasing numbers of people in our country and in our state, in our county, who declined to state a party preference. I think in Doña County, it's now close to 30%, 25 or 30% of the population that doesn't declare a party. So they don't get to vote in the primary. And on the other hand, this makes the parties less powerful, and that may be a disadvantage. So that's another voting issue. Some other voting issues that the League has long been concerned about are voting rights for the people in the District of Columbia. They have voted in presidential elections since the early 1960s, but they do not have representation in Congress, at least not voting representation. They have a non-voting member. And then another kind of voting rights issue that's out there is the restoration of voting rights to people who have been convicted of felonies. And that was a big issue in Florida a couple of years ago, where the populace voted to restore voting rights, and then the legislature added some qualifications to that. Another issue closely related to voting is redistricting. We've conducted the 2020 census this year. The numbers are due to be delivered before too long. And one purpose of the census, and the purpose that is incorporated in the Constitution, is that every 10 years we reapportion the House of Representatives, giving more seats to areas that are growing, fewer seats to areas that are shrinking. And then the states are asked to draw new district lines and for their congressional districts and also for legislative and other elected bodies. So that was already on our plates going into the 2021 legislative session, aside from what's happening right now. Some of you probably saw Representative Egoff's statement that came across as a fairly bare bones political power statement that Congressional District 2 would be different next time around. That's probably a true statement, but he tried to walk it back a bit. The issue of redistricting is one that's a really important issue for equity in terms of populations, subgroups of our population. We cannot redistrict, at least not blatantly, based on issues like race and ethnicity, but it is perfectly legal to redistrict, taking into account political party and incumbency. And the statement I've heard repeated a number of times about New Mexico recently is that New Mexico redistricting is generally fairly friendly toward incumbents and protects incumbents of whatever party. So I'm going to stop there and turn this over to Eileen.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Paul, for inviting us to your roundtable, and Sarah for moderating. I think analyzing elections is important every year, but it is particularly important this year. And we can learn from each other as we get into this whole discussion piece as well. And it's nice to see a few familiar faces. And I'm pretty sure what I know about the UU Church is that many of you are civically engaged. And so, thank you for doing that too. The information we have right now is very incomplete. As Kathy implied, the election seems to be going on forever. And so as we get more information, we will probably change our opinions and our ideas about what has happened in this election. I'd like to just say a little bit about the League of Women Voters for those of you that are not members of the League of Women Voters. We are a nonpartisan organization, which means that we do not campaign for or against candidates or parties, but we do study issues and take positions on those, however. And so one of those important issues is that we promote accessible, free, fair, and safe elections. And our mission is to empower voters and strengthen democracy. So in my comments, I'm going to try to avoid talking about elected officials and focus on the issues. But with our democracy threatened, we need to be taking action and to protect it and to strengthen it. So I'm going to start out with talking about some local and state issues and then move into some national issues. And at the end, I do have a slide with some references on it. So Sarah, if you're kind of aware of that, I would like to be able to put up that slide at the end so that if you are interested in checking out some of these references, you can feel free to do that. So in Doña Ana County, we have 128,777 registered voters. And of those, 82,873 voted in this election, which is about 64.35% of the eligible voters. In the state, we have 1,351,811 registered voters and 927,996 voted, or 68.65%. So our county was a little bit lower than the state level, but we could be really proud of our election system in this state. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology has this election performance index, and New Mexico rates in the top 5 of, they rate states that are 81% above in their voting, in their index issues. They look at things like voter turnout, voter registration rate, online registration availability, registration and absentee ballot problems, post-election audits that might be required or not. And so those are some of the things that they look at. So not only can we in the state be proud, they are also recognizing that we have a good election system in our state. A few of us were election watchers, and with spot checking, we believe that the poll workers were very well trained and they did a great job. I know in the couple of sites where I was, they were courteous to the voters. They made voters feel comfortable. Occasionally there were waiting lines, but it went through very fast. They were well organized. So we again, I think, should be very proud of our own election system. I'm going to talk a little bit about some gaps and some recommendations that came. I attended a League of Women Voters Santa Fe County webinar last week that was talking about the same issue related to New Mexico. And I'm wondering who in this gathering here might be a member of Common Cause New Mexico. Okay, I'm seeing some hands go up because the presenter was Heather Ferguson. She is the executive director of Common Cause New Mexico. And she also praised our election system, but she also reviewed and made some recommendations. So what I'm sharing with you are her recommendations. One is that we keep those temporary changes made for the COVID-19 in that Senate House Bill 4 that Kathy referred to earlier, and keeping some the things like processing absentee ballot applications, the intelligent barcode on those absentee ballots was really important, and people could track that. And just so delivering the absentee ballot application and processing those are things that she recommended. She also, Heather also believes that there should be a review and a revision of some of the safety codes. For example, with poll workers, you probably heard what happened at the absentee ballot warehouse in Doñana County with some issues with some of the challengers that were there. And that in other locations, as poll workers were counting ballots, there were some people hovering a little bit too close and causing some problems. So safety for the poll workers, I would agree with her. That would be something to be taking a look at. She also thought that there should be that the electioneering boundaries should be pushed back much farther than what they are right now. Because again, there were people that in some locations came and blocked entrances and things like that. And another probably really important item for me is not allowing intimidating firearms and dangerous weapons at the polls. And now we are an open carry state. But I think that, I'm not sure, I need to double check this, but I think that with our county building that they have put together some rules that forbid firearms on the property, and they cannot be in schools, of course, but evidently that was an issue at some places in the state too, not in our county. And another recommendation was that Native American tribal leaders should have the ability to lead their tribes when it comes to elections. They needed more polling locations and better access to voting. Another issue that appeared in the state was that the absentee ballot boxes were not all the same, and that became somewhat confusing to some of the voters. In fact, in one location, the absentee ballots were just put into a zippered pouch, so it didn't really look very secure at all. So those are some recommendations that came from Heather Ferguson. Let's move into some of the national issues then. I want to talk a little bit about election polls. As we all probably know, there are lots of sampling error in political polls. And in an article in Wired magazine by Gilad Edelman, he talks about some of the ways that there are sampling errors in the methodology. One is that college graduates and young people are overrepresented. Some people lie, and he claims that college educated persons are the worst about that lying when they're asked who they're voting for. And the other thing is that people who do not speak English are underrepresented in those polls. At any rate, the polls that we saw this year showed Democrats running away with the elections with huge gender gaps. And that did not turn out to be the case, as we all know. There is an ethnic gender gap, interestingly enough, and we can come back to that in a little bit. But we should not make judgments based on the polls that are out there. And if people with democratic values want a bigger share of political influence, I think every state needs to find a Stacey Abrams with a commitment to organizing everywhere. Then looking at some of the demographics of the voters, this information comes from Juan Gonzalez at Democracy Now! And there's also a document called Latino Decisions. I think it's strictly an online one, but they did an election eve poll. And so this following information that I'm sharing with you comes from those two resources. As we know, there was a raw increase in voter turnout this year. Over about 160 million people voted. And in 2018, 136 million people voted. So that is quite an increase. And according to the Latino Decisions and also Juan Gonzalez, the biggest increase in voters by ethnic group was within the Latinx ethnic group. There was a 64% increase in Latinx voters this year. And they typically were around about the 50% rate. And so this year, 2/3 of the eligible voters in that group went to the polls. And they are a very diverse group. And so Gonzalez talks about that in Miami and Dade County and the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, the Latinx were more likely to vote for Trump than for Biden. And some possible reasons for that is that there are a lot of immigrants in that Miami area from Nicaragua, Colombia, Venezuela, and Cuba, of course, and from their experiences in their own countries, they may have a more conservative point of view. And as far as the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, they've had a very good employment rate down there with the building of the walls and with customs agents, and the employment was evidently strong in that area, which maybe accounts for why they voted for Trump. And then Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, and New Mexico were more likely to vote for Biden. And Gonzalez is starting to call those states the brown belt, that it's a developing brown belt in those states. African Americans increased their voting by about 20%. Wow. Asian Americans about 16%. I don't have specifics on American Indians, but I think there was an increase there. They had a dramatic effect in Arizona, especially. And interestingly enough, they used social media a lot to get information out to their members. And they used the phrase, the theme, democracy is indigenous, implying that we in our country modeled the democracy that the indigenous groups had formed. And the whites there was a 6% increase. And Gonzalez is saying that the white voters underperformed, that there was a higher percentage that voted for Trump this year than voted for Biden, that voted for Trump this year over 2016, and the number of whites that voted for Trump in 2016. Gonzalez is saying that there's a national chauvinist movement in the US that believe in authoritarianism, and is really saying the white community needs to get organizing, and that some of the reasons there is Trump support by the conservative Republican establishment is not because what he's saying and the kind of person he's being, but that he is implementing policies that kind of support the conservative Republican establishment. I think those were interesting ideas to think about. And then Tufts University has this Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, and they work on the youth side. And so they reported that young voters ages 18 to 24, there was an increase in voting from that age group of between 5 and 9%. And then in 2016, they made up about 16% of the voters. So again, this is very incomplete information, and we'll be learning more hopefully as as the weeks go by. But the election very much revealed a large divide in our country. And so I was trying to think about what might be some of the possible causes for this divide. And certainly economic inequality and insecurity is an important part of this, with the level of poverty that is going on all around our country. And this impacts the identities of people as well as what they are able to do for survival. Another issue is the issue of abortion, especially in the Catholic Church. An article in the Santa Fe New Mexican last week was talking about this, and that the Catholic vote split almost evenly in support for Trump and Biden, which I find interesting. And the anti-abortion activists within the Catholic Church want Biden to be barred from Holy Communion. On the other hand, Pope Francis congratulated Biden, and Biden said he wants to work with the Pope on climate change, poverty, and immigration. And to me, that's really important too. And Paul was making some suggestions about the history of our country and immigration. And as a country, we have never figured out how to live together with ethnic and social economic status diversity. I'm wondering who in this gathering has read the book by Isabel Wickerson, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. No, okay, well, that's in the reference list that I hope to post at the end of of this part of the presentation. But Isabel Wickerson is a Pulitzer Prize winning writer. And when I was trying to find information about her, it came a site came up, and I didn't check this out, but it said that she and her husband were married by a Unitarian minister back in 1989. I thought you might be interested in that little fact about Isabel Wickerson. But she defines a caste system as the artificial ranking of human value that impacts the identities of people. And she believes that caste is a more accurate way to describe our social order than the words race or racism. That caste means a fixed and rigid ranking based on how people look. And she says race is more fluid and superficial. And I was really glad to find this description of our social system in this country. Some of you may have heard me say that I have trouble dealing with how the word racism and race is used, because we are part of one human race, and basically we're talking about skin color and ethnicity and things like that. So anyway, caste is an interesting concept to think about, and she compared 3 caste systems in the book: that from India, that from Nazi Germany, and from the United States. And it was interesting to read about it. I had heard this before, that the Nazis actually studied our US slavery system to develop their system to exterminate the Jews. They found books that were written talking about our system of slavery, and they used that to design their system to exterminate the Jews. And in fact, with those 3 caste systems, she sees a lot of similarities in them. And so the dominant caste would show hatred, tribalism, white supremacy, and those kinds of things have been reawakened, I believe, over the last few years in our country. And when the dominant caste feels threatened, or if they see that the scapegoats are being successful, they feel very, very threatened. And she also talks about that the people that live in the margins study those who are in power, and they figure out how they can survive. So they have a great deal of wisdom about survival. She raises an issue or a concept that was new to me called group narcissism. Group narcissism. So we are all capable of being good and evil. And so in this case, it would refer to, if we go back to Germany, the people after there were when there were parades or events where Hitler would come together with a large group of people, they would be screaming and clapping, and like he was some kind of a famous movie star or something. He was pretty much worshipped by a lot of the German people, and again, it was probably their effort to figure out how to survive. Reading this book is a little bit difficult because she's very descriptive and graphic in some of these awful things that have happened in the past. And an example of that group narcissism from our country would be that with lynchings in the south of our country, it would be advertised and people would gather like it was some kind of entertainment, and they would publish postcards that they could send to their family of what's happening during the lynching. So at the end of the book, she does give some suggestions about what we can do. One is to educate ourselves and to listen with empathy to others, to talk about it, which is what we can do today, and interrupt it when we see those situations of people being put down, and look for our commonalities, because we can find more commonalities among us probably if we really search for it than the differences. All right, so I will end there and ask for reactions to any of the issues that Kathy or I have raised, and then we would like to come to this question about getting some ideas from you on how to strengthen our democracy. But reactions to what you've heard.
Okay, anybody want to comment and ask questions, please? Anyone?
Hi, Eileen, it's Elena. On your comment about the book that you read and the lynchings, I don't know how many of you have read the book American Dirt, but in that book she mentions, and I think it is probably pretty true, that it's still going on our southern border, and that there is talk that these alt-rights that go down there actually kill and decapitate. They decapitate the people coming across the border, and those are their trophies.
Wow. Is that, do you know who the author is of that book?
Jeanette Cummings.
Okay.
I can write it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Here it is.
Oh, and if I can get that slide up so that I can put those references up, can I share a screen?
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen.
Hey, if I'm not mistaken, the book that Elena just mentioned is a novel.
Yes.
And so it's a fictionalized.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be seen as, one should not expect it to be, fully documented or referenced.
No, but talking to undocumented that come across Arizona, I wouldn't be surprised. Talking to them, and I lived for 15 years in Arizona.
Yeah.
But
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Isabel Wilkerson, that's the one you were referring to, right, Elena?
Yes.
No,
No,
I was referring to that.
yeah,
that's the one
I'm sorry, Eileen, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get, your names are similar.
Our names are similar, that's for sure.
But that sounds like a good book.
I assume that the list that you're showing there will be retained by the recording, Sarah?
Could be.
I'm sorry, what? I didn't hear that.
That the screen share that Eileen is now doing will be appear in the recording of this session.
Yes, it will show up in the recorded session.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and I think you said you have a website, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have a YouTube channel as well.
A YouTube channel. Well, I could send, if you give me your email address, I could send you that list too, so that you wouldn't have to listen through to the whole program to get this reference list.
Yeah, I think that'll be a good idea. I'll send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
This is Dave Rice. I had a question. We've been watching this fiasco unroll in Michigan and Pennsylvania in the East. Could you comment about how New Mexico selects its electors to the Electoral College?
I think that our electors in New Mexico, as in most states, are committed to voting for the winner of the popular vote in the state. I haven't done any research on that, and so I'm repeating something I've heard, and when I've heard it, people have said, well, it's been said without absolute certainty. So I
That
found
is-
that there are a lot of questions about voting processes that I am not prepared to answer.
Okay, because
I
the-
think since we went to, for Biden, that the leaders of the Democratic Party in New Mexico would select our 5 electors.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, because the issues out east seem to be more in the certification of actually the counts, which boiled down to these divisive votes. So it's sort of a step back from the final thing. Okay, well, thank you, Eileen.
I think
Well, if there,
Jane had a comment, I think.
Jane?
And I just wanted to say that presently there are only 2 states left where the electors do not all, the electoral votes in any given state do not go for the person who carried in the state. And that is Maine and Nebraska. They split their votes
Right.
to, if, for instance, Trump got 3/5 of the vote and they have 5 electoral votes, then 3 go to Trump, 2 go to Biden. But in all the other 48 states, whichever candidate carries the state, then all those electors are supposed to be pledged to vote for that person.
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up in regard to the number of registered voters that vote. And I know that Tom Dormady spent some time in Australia and New Zealand too, but in Australia, you supposedly get fined if you don't vote. They have about 80–90% of people that vote in Australia. I spent time there, and it's kind of nice because they really have a big turnout in Australia so far as percentage of adults that vote.
Mhm.
Well, thank you, Paul. And we think that 68% sounds good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, but that's only the people that actually go through the process of registering, right? That's not the percentage of all the people.
Well, I think in Australia, I think when they get a license or something, they're automatically registered.
Right.
And so it represents a large percent of those.
No, I mean here
here.
in New Mexico.
That's right.
Yeah,
Well,
because
that's the percent of our voters that voted. Of the registered voters in New Mexico, it was 64.35 voted.
Yeah, but
right, but what is it of all the people that actually could vote?
I don't know what is that? What percent in New Mexico aren't even registered? Anybody know?
Well, the number of registered voters in New Mexico are 1,351,811.
Yeah,
And
but
927,996 voted, which represents 68.65%.
But how about everybody that could vote in theory? It's like who's over 18?
People who haven't
Like a
registered
citizen.
is what she's
Yeah.
asking about.
Oh,
It's a fair number,
yeah.
Do we
I don't know that number.
but
Like in Germany, when you turn 18, you're automatically, registered to vote. So
And the same thing
you
is
get
true in
sent
Australia.
material to vote
yeah.
in the next
Yeah.
coming up election, so that is so easy. You don't
that
have
would-
to actually go out and register yourself.
That would be something to work for
I know,
in our state and in our nation, actually.
yeah.
If I could comment on those numbers, and we'll get new numbers when the census
Yes.
is released.
Yes.
But I looked it up a couple of weeks ago, and nationally, out of a population that is estimated to be 330 million, 258 million were above the age of 18.
Uh-huh.
But you must eliminate from that certain institutionalized people in prisons mainly, and that's 3 or 4 million. So roughly in the US, about 255 million were eligible to register. We'll end up with roughly 155 million total votes cast.
Almost
And
half.
I haven't looked up registrations. I just didn't do that.
Yeah, but it sounds
Okay.
like almost about half.
Oh, we're well above half of all who were eligible voted.
Yeah,
155 million versus about 255 million.
yeah, okay.
I had a question for Kathy.
Yes.
You had mentioned, referring to the book, The Accidental President,
Mhm.
that back in Kennedy's era, that had he been killed, there would not have been a logical choice. I happened to look that question up recently, and my reading of the 20th Amendment would indicate that if the president-elect were killed before he was inaugurated, that whoever is the vice president-elect would become the president.
Okay, was the 20th Amendment in place at the time?
Yeah, it was
guess it-
approved in the
okay.
30s.
Okay,
No, I just,
Well,
in the sense I thought maybe I had misunderstood that, but I must admit, while you were commenting, I quickly went to my Wikipedia.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
yes, but he would not have been officially the president-elect until the Electoral College met.
Yeah, the qualifier is that in the amendment, it says suitably qualified. And if the Electoral College hadn't met, then they would have to meet and decide that was what they wanted to do.
Yeah,
But it could, sadly, obviously our current situation is such that who knows what craziness may happen.
right. And so we are not structured in a way that takes into account all of these possibilities, and probably cannot be so structured, but we maybe need to fill in some of the holes.
Yeah, we do.
Well, that's maybe a good transition to the question. We would like your ideas, to share some ideas about what we can do to strengthen our democracy.
Well, I do know one thing. We should have civic classes in high school and the college that went by the wayside. And also just to have more sense of responsibility to our democracy. I just feel our schools have not, when I went to school way back, we had civic classes. We don't have that anymore. And it just seems to me, young people, and I, just like Jim, I've been teaching a number of them at the university here, and their understanding of democracy and so forth is rather limited. Wouldn't you say, Jim? I mean, you've been teaching here longer than I have. Young people's sense about civic responsibility and and voting isn't very strong.
Absolutely. And that's so different from, say, in the 60s when I was in school, and everybody was worried about being drafted and sent to march through rice paddies.
Me too.
I think we should institute a year of service, no matter if it's Peace Corps or whatever it is, out of high school. Or if you don't want to finish high school, then you do your year of service. And everybody does a year of service.
And I know conservatives that I've interacted with over the years. I think in general, they feel strong about that also. So it's not just liberals think that that's important. I think it's something that we can help make happen.
Yeah.
I have a comment in a response to the question. Can I do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, the comment is regarding the information that Juan Gonzalez provide, which I think Eileen really summarized it very nicely. But one thing that I need to mention, because I have heard it from different sources, is that whites actually didn't vote as much or as many as in the past, but it's due to the changing demographics. We have to take that into consideration. And
Right.
that's one of the reasons why it's also as Hispanics have become the largest minority, obviously their numbers are going to increase. So Juan Gonzalez, as well as other Latinos, are stating how women presented a great impact on this year's elections. In 4 more years, it's going to be Hispanics. And it's because Hispanics demographically is a group that is young, and they're becoming at age to actually participate, in elections. So we're gonna see more of that. And regarding the questions, what can we do to strengthen our democracy? Based on the information that I have collected from different sources, and I see that we need to aim for inclusiveness. We keep talking about inclusiveness, but when I check conferences, when I check programs and everything, I don't see any diversity most of the time. The people that talk are always kind of like the same. And it's not helping us at all. I just talked to some of my students in El Paso, in Tucson, telling them how grateful I am to be back in the border, because I'm able to listen to the analysis from people in Mexico City, from people in the border, from channels in the United States, in different places. And I was telling them for them to keep utilizing those 2 sources, not to be focused on American sources, because it's like the Olympics. And I gave them this as an example. When you watch the results of the Olympics in Mexico from Mexican channels, they tell you about, the gold winners from different countries. But if you watch the Olympic summary for United States, you only hear about United States. So that's an example. So inclusiveness is extremely important. And I also think that one of the issues that I saw was that we need to reach out to the rural areas. The rural areas are actually the ones that carry a lot of the ideas that are totally against some of the liberal ideas. So we need to reach out to there. There's the issue of language. I was very happy when I talked to Xochitl and I told her that she needed to do some ads in the Spanish TVs, because I think it was 16 years ago where they found out, for example, in El Paso, that the #1 station, TV station that people watch is Univision. Even though people speak English, still because the grandparents and parents prefer Univision. So Univision is the #1 in El Paso, and it has been #1 for the past at least, over 16 years. So that's important. So language is important, but also cultural. There's a lot of issues that I have with the way some of the campaigns are conducted. But when I look at who's making the decisions on how to conduct the elections, I don't see anyone, I see very little minorities. I was telling Eileen actually in one of the meetings that in California, when I was working for an elected official, people used to come to me and says, Rosa, you know the Hispanic community here, how can I reach out to them? And obviously the elected officials, Hispanic elected officials, we have the list of the key leaders, but I will tell them, announce in the radio, because we know culturally that in Hispanic, everywhere where they're gonna be, more than likely, they're gonna be listening to the radio. So they said, oh, we never thought about it. So that's an example. The other issue is the technical part, that this election was conducted for the most part through text messages and phone calls. Well, guess what? They was not very good to really reach out to the new, a new registered voter, or to somebody that has not been registered, because who is this person calling me on the phone? I don't know you, therefore I'm not gonna answer you, and I'm not interested in talking to you. Very limited outreach and registration was done in the rural areas. And I'm very sad about it, because in New Mexico, I'm looking at the statistics right now, we are 49% Hispanics, and not to invest on doing that is totally unbelievable. But anyway, the results of the elections was proof that Democrats needed to actually invest more on that. Check on the census demographics, it's extremely important, and use your campaign expenditures equally, balance it out. Don't just focus on the urban areas, which for the most part, that's what happened this time, because the rural areas as well, they need outreach, and they're not gonna go with only TV or whatever. You're gonna need to find out different ways of doing it. So anyway, as somebody who has worked in campaigns and worked with politicians in Los Angeles and El Paso and live in other places, I know that campaign expenditures, said a lot about what people care about. And I always told my constituents when I was working for politicians, look at the budget. The budget demonstrates what people think and what they value, okay? So that's my take on the whole thing. Thank you.
Well, I think
I agree with what you're saying about working on inclusion and reaching out to the rural areas, but how to do that, I think, is an issue that could use some brainstorming. And you did give us a couple of ideas, Rosa, with using the radio and dedicating a budget to it, and using social media over some of the other things. So,
but Eileen, when I said invest in the rural areas, I moved to this state because it was the last in the border that I needed to live in, and I'm going to invest my energies on civically engage the rural areas. I know I have the advantage that I'm bilingual, that I'm Hispanic, that I'm bicultural. So I know that's my strength, and also my knowledge in community organization and as a social worker. Those are my strengths. So I need to go in there and actually connect with the leaders, train them, make conscience of the importance of them becoming active. I don't see many of the organizations doing that here, and we need to do more for the next election.
Yeah, well, I'm sure
about this.
Sarah's going to get at me for, we're going over an hour here.
Oh,
anyway,
okay.
Let's give these two fine ladies a big clap for informing us about what's going on.
Thank you.
And I just want to mention next Sunday will be Diane Busmonti, and talking about integrated services for immigrant families. And by the way, I think Susan, oh yeah, there you are. On the December 20th, we're going to use a roundtable for the church meeting. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Susan. Oh, yeah.
Sure, I have to get unmuted. Yes, the annual congregational meeting, both the budget meeting and the meeting to elect the new board of trustees members and the other elected officials. Those are going to be combined, and the meeting will be held at this very time slot at 2 p.m. on Sunday, December 20th. We're looking forward to it. We need to have a new budget for 2021 approved, plus the elections, and it will be important to have as
Yeah,
many folks there as we can.
Susan, how will the vote be registered?
We'll be using what is it called? It's part of Zoom when you are but we have to go through the administrative. So when I look for it on mine, it's not there. But there's a way to vote. And then if there are two people using a machine, we'll actually be posting it again for those folks. So we're still working on that. Tom Dormady is helping me on that. He's used it before, thank goodness.
Thank you.
well, okay, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thank
everyone
you.
for coming.
Thank you,
Thank you
Paul.
all.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
You too.